I woke up to 3 feet of snow blocking my driveway and a certified letter taped to my front door that made my blood run cold. The envelope was from the Pine Ridge Homeowners Association, and inside was a notice claiming they had successfully annexed my 12 acres of land into their jurisdiction. According to the document, I now owed them $15,000 in back dues, fines, and special assessments, payable immediately. My name is Marcus Chen, and I had specifically purchased this property in rural Montana just outside of Missoula because it was far enough from any HOA nonsense. I had done my research, hired a surveyor, checked with the county, and made absolutely certain that my land was free and clear of any homeowner association entanglements. That was 3 years ago, and I had been living here peacefully ever since, running my small software consulting business from home and enjoying the solitude that 12 acres of wilderness provided. The letter was dated 2 days prior, December 18th, 2025. I looked at my phone and saw it was now December 20th. The storm had knocked out my internet and cell service for the past 48 hours, which explained why I had not received any electronic notifications. My truck was buried under a mountain of snow, and the road leading to my property had not been plowed. I was effectively stranded. I read through the document again, my hands shaking with anger. The Pine Ridge HOA, which governed a development of cookie-cutter homes about a mile down the road, claimed that they had petitioned the county to expand their boundaries. According to this letter, signed by someone named Patricia Thornton, HOA president, the expansion had been approved, and my property was now within their domain. The letter detailed a litany of violations I had supposedly committed: unapproved fence color, unsightly firewood storage, unauthorized outbuilding, and failure to maintain grass height standards. I lived on 12 acres of Montana wilderness. I had a split-rail fence that blended with the natural landscape. My firewood was neatly stacked in a covered area near my workshop. My outbuilding was a legitimate tool shed that I had properly permitted with the county. And grass height standards? Half my property was natural meadow and forest. I tried my cell phone again. Still no signal. The landline was also dead, likely due to the weight of snow on the lines. I was completely cut off, and I knew that was exactly what Patricia Thornton had been counting on. She had timed this perfectly. I threw on my winter gear and waded through the snow to my workshop. I kept an old CB radio in there for emergencies, something my grandfather had given me years ago. It took me 20 minutes to get the thing working, but eventually I managed to reach a trucker passing through on Highway 93. This is an emergency, I said into the handset. I need you to make a phone call for me. The trucker, who identified himself as Dale, agreed to help. I gave him my attorney's number and a brief message to relay. My attorney, Sarah Blackwood, was a sharp legal mind I had kept on retainer specifically for situations like this. Well, not exactly like this. I'd never imagined something this audacious, but I believed in being prepared. Dale called back 20 minutes later on the CB. Your lawyer says she is on it. She said to tell you, and I quote, "Do not respond to anything from the HOA. I will handle this." I thanked Dale profusely and settled in to wait. The snow was still coming down hard, and I knew I would not be going anywhere today. I made myself some coffee and started going through my property records, pulling out every document I had from the original purchase. I had the deed, the survey, the title insurance, and most importantly, a document from the county clerk's office from 3 years ago explicitly stating that my property was outside any HOA jurisdiction. As I sat there reviewing my paperwork, I thought about Patricia Thornton. I had met her exactly once, about 6 months after I had moved in. She had driven up to my property uninvited, stepping out of a white Lexus SUV with the kind of haircut that screamed, "I want to speak to the manager." She had introduced herself as the president of the Pine Ridge HOA and suggested that I might want to voluntarily join their association for my own benefit. I had politely but firmly declined, explaining that I had specifically chosen this property because it was not part of an HOA. She'd smiled tightly, looked around my property with barely concealed disgust, and told me that things change and I should reconsider. I had not heard from her since, but I had noticed her driving by my property on several occasions, always slowing down to stare at my land with that same expression of disapproval. The next morning, December 21st, I woke to the sound of a snowplow on the main road. My cell service had returned overnight, and my phone immediately lit up with dozens of messages and missed calls. Most were from Sarah, but there were also several from the Pine Ridge HOA, each one more threatening than the last. The most recent one, sent just an hour ago, informed me that I had 24 hours to pay the $15,000 or face immediate legal action, including potential foreclosure proceedings. I called Sarah immediately. "Marcus, thank God," she answered on the first ring. "Are you okay? Can you get out of there?" "I can probably get to town today if the plows have cleared the county roads. Sarah, what the hell is going on?" "I've been digging into this since yesterday afternoon," she said, and I could hear the anger in her voice. "This Patricia Thornton is a piece of work. She did petition the county for boundary expansion, but she did it through some obscure procedural loophole that barely anyone knows about. She filed the petition during the week before Christmas, when most county offices are operating with skeleton crews. She also deliberately filed it in a way that did not require direct notification to affected property owners. How is that legal? It is not, or at least it should not be. There is a Montana state law that requires notification to all affected property owners at least 30 days before any annexation hearing. She is claiming that because your property was listed in a public notice posted in the county clerk's office and published in a legal notices section of a newspaper, that counts as proper notification. Technically, under a very narrow reading of the statute, she might have a case, but it is absolutely contrary to the spirit and intent of the law. So what do? I already filed an emergency motion to void the annexation first thing this morning when the courthouse opened. I'm heading to the county courthouse right now. Judge Morrison is hearing emergency motions today, and I got us on the docket for 11 o'clock. I need you to meet me there if you can make it." I looked at my watch. It was 9:30. I will be there. I spent the next hour digging out my truck and clearing enough of the driveway to make it to the main road. By the time I reached the highway, my shoulders were burning from the effort, but adrenaline kept me moving. The drive to Missoula normally took 45 minutes, but with the road conditions, I knew it would take longer. I made it to the Missoula County Courthouse with 15 minutes to spare. Sarah was waiting for me on the steps, her briefcase in one hand and a coffee in the other. She looked like she had not slept. "You look terrible," I said by way of greeting. "You should see the other guy," she replied with a grim smile. "Come on, we need to go over a few things before we go in." We found a quiet corner in the courthouse hallway, and Sarah spread out several documents on a bench. "Here is what we have got. First, your original property deed clearly states that the land is outside any HOA jurisdiction. Second, I pulled the survey from when you purchased the property, which shows your boundaries extend well beyond the Pine Ridge development. Third, and this is the big one, I found the county records from the alleged annexation hearing." Alleged? The hearing took place on December 16th at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. According to the county records, the only people who attended were Patricia Thornton, 2 other HOA board members, and a county clerk who was probably more interested in getting home for the holidays than actually reviewing the petition. No one from the County Planning Commission was there, no one from the county attorney's office, and obviously, no affected property owners. Because we did not know about it. Exactly. I also found something else interesting. Guess how many properties were included in this annexation? I'm guessing mine was not the only one. Yours and 4 others, all of them large parcels on the outskirts of the Pine Ridge development. But here's the thing. You are the only one who got a letter. I called the other 4 property owners this morning. None of them have any idea this happened. I felt my jaw clench. So she specifically targeted me. That would be my guess. I think the plan was to go after the others later, but she wanted to start with you for some reason. Maybe she does not like you, maybe she thinks you are an easy target, or maybe she just really hates how you maintain your property. So what is our argument in there? Sarah smiled, and it was not a friendly expression. We are going with multiple angles. First, improper notification. The state statute requires reasonable efforts to notify affected property owners, and a small posting in a legal notices section does not meet that standard, especially when the county has your current mailing address on file. Second, procedural irregularity. The hearing was conducted without proper oversight from the County Planning Commission, which is required for any annexation petition. Third, And this is the nuclear option: fraud. Fraud? I am going to argue that Patricia Thornton deliberately timed this petition to take advantage of reduced staffing during the holidays, deliberately chose an obscure notification method to avoid alerting affected property owners, and deliberately targeted your property for personal reasons unrelated to any legitimate HOA interest. If I can prove that, the entire annexation is void, and she could face serious legal consequences. Before I could respond, a bailiff called out, "Blackwood versus Pine Ridge HOA, Judge Morrison, Courtroom 3. We gathered our documents and headed into the courtroom. It was a smaller room, used for emergency motions and preliminary hearings. Judge Morrison was already seated, a stern-looking woman in her 60s with silver hair and reading glasses perched on her nose. On the other side of the aisle, I saw Patricia Thornton for the first time in years. She looked exactly as I remembered, maybe a bit older, with blonde highlights that were just a shade too bright in a pantsuit that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. She was seated next to a man in an expensive suit who I assumed was her attorney. When she saw me, her expression shifted from smug confidence to barely concealed anger. "All rise," the bailiff announced, even though we were already standing. Judge Morrison looked over her glasses at both parties. "Please be seated. I have reviewed the emergency motion filed by Ms. Blackwood this morning. This is regarding an annexation petition approved by the county on December 16th, correct?" "Yes, Your Honor," Sarah said. "And Ms. Blackwood, you are arguing that this annexation was improperly conducted and should be voided." "That is correct, Your Honor." Judge Morrison turned to Patricia's attorney. "Mr. Hartley, I assume you are representing the Pine Ridge Homeowners Association." "Yes, Your Honor, and we strenuously object to this motion. The annexation was conducted entirely within the bounds of Montana law, and all proper procedures were followed." "We will see about that," Judge Morrison said dryly. "Ms. Blackwood, you may proceed." Sarah stood and approached the bench, handing a packet of documents to the judge and another to Mr. Hartley. "Your Honor, my client, Marcus Chen, purchased his property in 2022, specifically because it was outside any HOA jurisdiction. He received no notice of the December 16th hearing, despite the county having his current mailing address on file. The only notification was a small posting in the legal notices section of the Missoulian newspaper, which is not sufficient under Montana Code Annotated 76-2201, which requires reasonable efforts to notify all affected property owners." Mr. Hartley stood. "Your Honor, the statute requires publication in a newspaper of general circulation, which we did. It also requires posting at the county clerk's office, which we did. We followed the letter of the law." "Following the letter of the law is not the same as following the spirit of the law, Mr. Hartley," Judge Morrison said. "Ms. Blackwood, continue." "Thank you, Your Honor. The second issue is procedural. According to county regulations, any annexation petition must be reviewed by the County Planning Commission before approval. There is no record of such a review taking place. The hearing on December 16th was attended only by HOA representatives and a single county clerk, with no Planning Commission oversight." Judge Morrison frowned and looked at Mr. Hartley. "Is that accurate?" Mr. Hartley shifted uncomfortably. "Your Honor, the clerk who processed the petition was acting under delegated authority." "Delegated by whom?" "By the county clerk's office." "Mr. Hartley, the county clerk's office does not have the authority to bypass Planning Commission review for annexation petitions. That is a clear violation of county procedure." Judge Morrison was looking decidedly less patient. Sarah continued, "Finally, Your Honor, we have evidence that this entire annexation was conducted in bad faith. The petition was filed during the week before Christmas when county offices were operating with minimal staff. The hearing was scheduled with less than 2 weeks' notice, during a period when many people are traveling for the holidays. And most tellingly, my client was the only property owner to receive any follow-up notification in the form of a letter demanding immediate payment of $15,000 in fees and fines, delivered while he was stranded by a snowstorm with no phone or internet service." Patricia Thornton stood up abruptly. "Your Honor, this is ridiculous. Mr. Chen has been maintaining his property in violation of basic community standards for years. His land is an eyesore that affects all of our property values." Judge Morrison turned to her with an expression that could freeze lava. Mrs. Thornton, you are not an attorney, and you will not speak in my courtroom unless I ask you a direct question. Sit down. Patricia sat, her face flushed red. Judge Morrison turned back to the attorneys. Mr. Hartley, do you have any response to these allegations? Mr. Hartley stood again, but he looked like a man who knew he was standing on a sinking ship. Your Honor, while the timing may seem unfortunate, there was no intent to deceive or defraud anyone. My clients simply followed the procedures as they understood them. The problem, Mr. Hartley, is that the procedures as they understood them are not the actual procedures required by law. Judge Morrison flipped through the documents Sarah had provided. I am looking at the county regulations right now, and it is very clear that Planning Commission review is mandatory for annexation petitions. It is also very clear that reasonable efforts must be made to notify affected property owners. A small newspaper posting that most people never read does not constitute reasonable effort when the county has current mailing addresses for all affected parties. She closed the folder and looked at both attorneys. I am prepared to rule on this matter now. The annexation approved on December 16, 2025, is hereby voided due to procedural irregularities and insufficient notification to affected property owners. All properties included in the annexation petition are restored to their previous status, and any fees or fines assessed by the Pine Ridge Homeowners Association are nullified. I felt a wave of relief wash over me, but Sarah was not done. Your Honor, if I may, we would also like to request an investigation into whether this annexation attempt constitutes fraud or abuse of process. Judge Morrison nodded slowly. Ms. Blackwood, I think that is an excellent suggestion. I am ordering the county attorney's office to investigate the circumstances surrounding this annexation petition. If they find evidence of intentional misconduct, they should pursue appropriate charges. She looked directly at Patricia Thornton. Mrs. Thornton, I suggest you speak with your attorney about your potential legal exposure here. Patricia looked like she had been slapped. Her attorney put a hand on her arm, probably to keep her from saying something that would make things worse. Judge Morrison banged her gavel. This hearing is adjourned. Mr. Chen, you are free to go, and I apologize on behalf of the county for this debacle. We walked out of the courthouse into the cold December air, and I finally allowed myself to breathe. Sarah, that was incredible. That was just the beginning, she said. Judge Morrison ordered an investigation, which means the county attorney is going to be looking into Patricia's conduct. If they find what I think they will find, she could be facing criminal charges for fraud and abuse of process. What happens now? Now you go home, enjoy your holidays, and let the legal system work. I am going to file a civil suit against Patricia Thornton and the Pine Ridge HOA for harassment, abuse of process, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. We are going to make sure this never happens again. We shook hands, and I started walking back to my truck. Before I got there, I heard someone calling my name. I turned to see Patricia Thornton marching toward me, her attorney trailing behind her and trying to get her to stop. This is not over, she hissed when she reached me. You think you are so smart living out there on your little compound, thumbing your nose at civilized society? Your property is a blight on this community. Mrs. Thornton, her attorney said urgently, please stop talking. I looked at Patricia calmly. Mrs. Thornton, my property is not in your community. It never was, and it never will be. You tried to steal my land because you do not like how I live my life, and it backfired spectacularly. I suggest you take your attorney's advice and stop talking before you make things worse for yourself. Her face went from red to purple. You have not heard the last of this. I will find a way to make your life miserable. Mrs. Thornton, her attorney practically shouted, stop talking right now. But she was on a roll. I know people in this county. I have connections. I will make sure every permit you ever try to file gets denied. I will make sure the building inspectors come out to your property every week. I will make sure the health department, the fire marshal, and every other agency in this county makes your life a living hell. I looked at her attorney. You are getting all of this, right? Because I am recording it. I held up my phone, which I had started recording on the moment she had approached me. Patricia's face went white. Her attorney closed his eyes and looked like he wanted to die. Mrs. Thornton, he said quietly, I can no longer represent you. You need to find new counsel immediately. He turned and walked away without another word. Patricia stood there, apparently realizing what she had just done. She opened her mouth, closed it, then turned and walked quickly to her Lexus. I sent the recording to Sarah immediately. She replied within seconds, "Oh, this is beautiful. I'm adding witness intimidation and threats to abuse government power to the civil suit. She just handed us everything we need." I drove home feeling better than I had in days. The snow was still piled high around my property, but it looked beautiful in the afternoon sun. I spent the rest of the day clearing paths and making sure my animals were taken care of. I had 3 chickens, a goat named Herbert, and a dog named Ranger, who thought he was much tougher than his 30 pounds suggested. The next few days were quiet. Christmas came and went, and I enjoyed the peace of my property without the specter of HOA nonsense hanging over me. Sarah kept me updated on the investigation. The county attorney's office had assigned a prosecutor named James Chen, no relation, to look into the annexation attempt. He was reportedly very interested in what he was finding. On December 28th, Sarah called with an update. The county attorney is moving forward with charges. Patricia Thornton is being charged with fraud, abusive process, and attempted theft by deception. Apparently, the investigation turned up some other interesting facts. Like what? Like the fact that she has tried this before with other properties, but she always backed down when the property owners pushed back. You are the first one she actually followed through with, probably because she thought you being snowed in would give her time to establish the annexation before you could fight back. The other HOA board members are cooperating with investigators and claiming they had no idea what she was doing. Do you believe them? Honestly, I think they are telling the truth. I have talked to 2 of them, and they seem genuinely shocked by all of this. I think Patricia was running the HOA like her personal fiefdom, and the other board members just rubber-stamped whatever she wanted. So what happens next? Patricia will be arraigned on January 3rd. I'm also moving forward with the civil suit. I think we have a very strong case for damages, including compensation for your time, emotional distress, and punitive damages to make sure she never tries this again with anyone else. The new year came, and with it, more developments. Patricia Thornton was arraigned on January 3rd, 2026, and pleaded not guilty to all charges. Her new attorney, a criminal defense lawyer from Billings named Robert Shaw, tried to argue that this was all a misunderstanding, and that Patricia had been acting in what she believed were the best interests of the community. The prosecutor, James Chen, was having none of it. He laid out a detailed timeline showing how Patricia had deliberately chosen the timing of the petition, how she had misled the county clerk about the notification requirements, and how she had specifically targeted my property while excluding other affected landowners from notification. He also presented evidence that Patricia had been researching Montana annexation laws for months before filing the petition, which suggested premeditation. The judge set a trial date for March and released Patricia on her own recognizance, with the condition that she resign as president of the Pine Ridge HOA immediately and have no contact with me or any of the other property owners who had been included in the annexation attempt. Sarah filed our civil suit on January 10th, seeking $250,000 in damages. The suit named both Patricia Thornton personally and the Pine Ridge HOA as defendants. The HOA's insurance company immediately started trying to settle, claiming that Patricia had been acting outside the scope of her authority and that the HOA should not be held liable for her actions. "Are we going to settle?" I asked Sarah during one of our regular update calls. "Not with Patricia," she said firmly. "The HOA, maybe, but Patricia needs to face consequences for what she did. She tried to steal your land, Marcus. That's not something we are just going to let slide." Over the next few weeks, I watched from a distance as Patricia's life unraveled. The local newspaper picked up the story, running several articles about the HOA president accused of land grab. The Pine Ridge HOA held an emergency election and installed a new board of directors who immediately issued a statement apologizing for Patricia's actions and promising reform. Several of Patricia's neighbors in Pine Ridge started coming forward with their own stories of HOA harassment. One couple said Patricia had fined them $8,000 for painting their front door the wrong shade of blue. Another homeowner said Patricia had tried to force them to remove a vegetable garden from their backyard because it was unsightly. A third claimed that Patricia had used HOA funds to hire a private investigator to spy on residents she suspected of violating HOA rules. The new HOA board launched an internal audit and discovered that Patricia had spent over $50,000 in HOA funds on legal fees and consulting services over the past 2 years, much of it related to her vendetta against properties outside the HOA boundaries. They referred the matter to law enforcement, and Patricia picked up additional charges of embezzlement and misappropriation of funds. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. In February, I was deposed for the civil suit. Patricia's attorney tried to argue that I had somehow provoked her actions by refusing to maintain my property to community standards. Sarah destroyed that argument by pointing out that my property was not part of any community, and that I had no obligation to follow HOA standards that did not apply to me. "Mr. Chen," Patricia's attorney asked during the deposition, "is it true that you have visible firewood piles on your property?" "Yes, I heat with wood. It is Montana." "And is it true that you have chickens?" "3 chickens, yes." "And these chickens are visible from the road?" "If you drive by my property and look for them, sure." "Would you say your property has a rustic appearance?" Sarah interrupted. "Counsel, where are you going with this? My client's aesthetic choices are not relevant to whether your client attempted to illegally annex his property." The attorney sighed. "No further questions." March arrived, and with it, Patricia Thornton's criminal trial. I was called as a witness on the second day. The courtroom was packed with people from the Pine Ridge development, many of whom had come to watch their former HOA president face justice. I testified about purchasing the property, about Patricia's visit years ago, about being snowed in when the annexation letter arrived, and about the confrontation outside the courthouse. The prosecutor played the recording of Patricia threatening to abuse her government connections to harass me, and I watched several jurors' expressions harden. Patricia's attorney tried to paint her as a well-meaning community volunteer who had made some procedural mistakes. But then the prosecutor called the county clerk who had processed the annexation petition. She testified that Patricia had specifically told her that all affected property owners had been notified and that planning commission review was not necessary for this type of petition. Both statements were lies, and Patricia had known it. The trial lasted 5 days. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all counts: fraud, abusive process, attempted theft by deception, embezzlement, and misappropriation of funds. The judge scheduled sentencing for April 15th. In the meantime, the civil suit moved forward. The Pine Ridge HOA's insurance company agreed to settle with me for $75,000, which Sarah negotiated up to $100,000 by threatening to include the insurance company's liability for failing to properly oversee the HOA's activities. Patricia's personal attorney came back with a settlement offer of $10,000. Sarah responded by increasing our demand to $500,000 and adding a claim for punitive damages. We were not settling. The civil trial was scheduled for May, but before it could begin, something unexpected happened. Patricia's attorney filed a motion to delay the trial pending sentencing in the criminal case. The judge denied the motion, but allowed Patricia to make a statement in open court. I sat in the courtroom on April 20th, curious about what she had to say. Patricia stood up, looking nothing like the confident, imperious woman I had first met. She had lost weight, her hair had gone mostly gray, and she looked exhausted. "Your Honor," she said quietly, "I would like to address Mr. Chen directly, if I may." The judge looked at me, and I nodded. Patricia turned to face me. "Mr. Chen, I owe you an apology. What I did was wrong, and I knew it was wrong even while I was doing it. I convinced myself that I was protecting the community, that people like you who did not conform to our standards were somehow a threat to our way of life. But the truth is, I was just threatened by the fact that you were happy living differently than how I thought people should live." She paused, and I was surprised to see tears in her eyes. "I lost sight of everything that matters. I destroyed my reputation, my finances, my marriage, and my freedom, all because I could not accept that other people have the right to live their lives as they choose. I am truly sorry for what I put you through, and I understand if you can never forgive me." The courtroom was silent. I stood up slowly. "Mrs. Thornton," I said, I appreciate your apology. What you did was serious, and it had real consequences. But I also believe in second chances. If you are willing to drop your defense in the civil suit and agree to a reasonable settlement, I am willing to accept your apology and move on with my life." Sarah looked at me in surprise, but she did not object. Patricia's attorney immediately requested a sidebar with the judge and Sarah. They spoke quietly for several minutes, then returned. "Mr. Chen," the judge said, "Mrs. Thornton has agreed to settle the civil suit for $200,000, payable over 5 years, with the first payment due within 30 days of her release from incarceration. She has also agreed to a permanent injunction prohibiting her from serving on any HOA board or holding any position of authority in any homeowner association. Are these terms acceptable to you?" I looked at Sarah, who nodded slightly. "Yes, Your Honor, those terms are acceptable." On April 15th, Patricia Thornton was sentenced to 18 months in prison, followed by 3 years of probation. She was also ordered to pay restitution to the Pine Ridge HOA for the funds she had embezzled. The judge gave her credit for time served and good behavior, which meant she would likely serve about 12 months. "Mrs. Thornton," the judge said during sentencing, "you abused a position of trust to pursue a personal vendetta. You lied to government officials, attempted to steal property that was not yours, and misappropriated funds that belonged to your community. However, I also believe that you have shown genuine remorse for your actions, and I hope you will use your time in prison to reflect on how you got to this point and how you can be a better person going forward." After the sentencing, I walked out of the courthouse feeling a strange mix of emotions. On one hand, I was glad that justice had been served. On the other hand, I could not help but feel that the entire situation had been such a waste. Patricia had destroyed her life over something as petty as not liking how I stored my firewood. Sarah joined me on the courthouse steps. "You surprised me in there," she said. "I thought you would want to take her for everything she had." "What would be the point?" I replied. "She is already going to prison, and she is already financially ruined. Making her suffer more would not make me feel better, and it would not give me back the time and stress this whole thing cost me." "You are a better person than I am," Sarah said with a smile. "Or maybe just more tired," I said. "I just want to go home and get back to my life." And that is exactly what I did. The first payment from Patricia arrived in June 2026, delivered through her attorney. It was a cashier's check for $40,000, the first of 5 annual payments. I deposited it and used some of the money to make improvements to my property, including a new greenhouse and a proper storage shed for my firewood. The Pine Ridge HOA continued under new management, and by all accounts, they were much more reasonable than Patricia had been. The new president, a retired schoolteacher named Margaret Wilson, even stopped by my property one day to apologize personally for what had happened and to assure me that the new board had no interest in expanding into areas outside their jurisdiction. "We are just trying to run a decent neighborhood," she told me over coffee in my kitchen. Patricia forgot that being part of an HOA is supposed to be voluntary, not mandatory. People should be able to choose how they want to live. I appreciated the sentiment and told her so. We parted on good terms, and I occasionally saw her at the local farmers market, where we would exchange pleasantries and move on with our days. Life returned to normal, or as normal as it ever was on 12 acres in rural Montana. I continued running my software consulting business, taking care of my animals, and enjoying the peace and quiet that I had moved here for in the first place. Ranger got older and slower, but he still barked at every deer that wandered through the property. Herbert the goat developed a taste for my vegetable garden, which led to an ongoing battle of wills between us. The chickens continued providing eggs and entertainment in equal measure. I thought about Patricia Thornton from time to time, usually when I was stacking firewood or working in my garden, activities that had apparently offended her so much. I wondered if she was reflecting on her choices, if she was becoming the better person the judge had hoped she would become. I hoped so, for her sake. One afternoon in late summer, I was out working on my fence when a car pulled up my driveway. It was not a car I recognized, a modest sedan that looked a few years old. A woman got out, and it took me a moment to realize it was Patricia Thornton. She was out of prison on work release, according to what her attorney had told Sarah. She approached slowly, stopping a respectful distance away. "Mr. Chen, I know I am not supposed to contact you, but I wanted to deliver this in person." She held out an envelope. It is the second year's payment. I'm 3 months early, but I got a job, and I wanted to make sure you got what you were owed. I took the envelope carefully, making sure not to get too close. Thank you, Mrs. Thornton. I appreciate that. She nodded and turned to leave, then paused. Your property is beautiful, by the way. I can see why you love it here. Thank you, I said again, genuinely surprised. She got back in her car and drove away. I opened the envelope and found a cashier's check for $40,000, along with a handwritten note. Thank you for giving me a second chance. I will spend the rest of my life trying to deserve it. I folded the note and put it in my pocket, then went back to work on my fence. The sun was setting over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Ranger was chasing grasshoppers in the meadow. Herbert was investigating something near the tree line. My chickens were settling into their coop for the night. This was exactly the life I had wanted when I bought this property 4 years ago. It had taken a battle with an overreaching HOA president, an emergency court hearing, a criminal trial, and a civil suit to protect it. But it had been worth every moment. My 12 acres were mine, free and clear, and no homeowner association would ever change that. I finished working on the fence as the last light faded from the sky, then headed back to the house. Tomorrow I would deposit the check, send a thank you note to Sarah for all her work, and maybe take Ranger for a long hike in the woods. But tonight, I was just going to sit on my porch, watch the stars come out, and appreciate the simple fact that I was home, on my own land, living life on my own terms. That was all I had ever wanted, and thanks to a sharp attorney and a judge who understood that procedural rules exist for a reason, it was all I had. Patricia Thornton had tried to take that away from me while I was snowed in and isolated, thinking she could slip an illegal annexation through before I could respond. Instead, my attorney had the filing voided by noon, and Patricia had learned a very expensive lesson about respecting other people's property rights. Some stories end with villains getting their comeuppance and heroes riding off into the sunset. This one ended with a woman going to prison, losing everything she had and hopefully learning to be a better person. It ended with me standing on my own land, watching the stars and feeling grateful for the legal system that protected individual property rights even when powerful people tried to abuse their authority. The Pine Ridge HOA was now run by reasonable people who understood boundaries, both literal and figurative. My property remained outside their jurisdiction, as it always should have been, and I went back to living my quiet life in the Montana wilderness, stacking firewood, raising chickens, and bothering absolutely no one. In the end, that was the real victory. Not the court cases or the settlement money, though those were satisfying in their own way. The real victory was simply being left alone to live my life as I chose, on my own property, without someone like Patricia Thornton deciding that her vision of how the world should look was more important than my right to exist peacefully on my own land. I learned some important lessons from the whole experience. I learned the value of keeping detailed records, which had been crucial in proving my case. I learned the importance of having a good attorney on retainer, because Sarah's quick action had been the difference between losing my property and keeping it. I learned that even in rural Montana, you could never be too far from someone who wanted to exert control over your life. But most importantly, I learned that the legal system, for all its flaws and complications, could still work the way it was supposed to. When Patricia Thornton had tried to use obscure procedural loopholes to steal my land, the courts had seen through her scheme and shut it down. When she had broken the law, she had faced consequences. When she had shown genuine remorse, she had been given a path to redemption. That was how justice was supposed to work, and I was grateful to have experienced it, even though I would have much preferred never needing it in the first place. The seasons changed, as they always do in Montana. Winter came again, bringing snow and cold and the kind of quiet that only exists in the wilderness. My first winter after the whole HOA debacle felt different somehow, more peaceful, as if the land itself was settling back into its natural rhythm after the disruption. I kept in touch with Sarah, who had become a friend through the whole ordeal. She occasionally sent me updates about other HOA cases she was handling, some of which made my situation look tame by comparison. There was apparently an HOA in Billings that had tried to ban residents from parking their own cars in their own driveways, and another in Great Falls that had attempted to impose a dress code for people checking their mail. The problem, Sarah explained to me over drinks one evening when she was passing through Missoula, is that HOAs attract people who want power but have never learned to use it responsibly. They start with good intentions, maintaining property values and keeping neighborhoods pleasant, but then it becomes about control for its own sake. Like Patricia, I said. Exactly like Patricia. She started out probably wanting to make Pine Ridge a nice place to live, but somewhere along the way, it became about enforcing her vision on everyone around her, even people who had never agreed to be part of her community. I thought about that conversation often in the months that followed. It helped me understand, if not forgive, what Patricia had done. She had not been evil, just misguided and drunk on the small amount of power that being HOA president had given her. That did not excuse her actions, but it made them more understandable. The third annual payment arrived right on schedule in June 2028, and again it came with a short note from Patricia. She was working as a bookkeeper for a small business in Missoula, living in a modest apartment and attending therapy twice a week. She was not asking for forgiveness or sympathy, just letting me know that she was trying to be better. I appreciated the updates. They reminded me that people could change, that mistakes did not have to define someone forever. Patricia had done something terrible. She had faced the consequences, and now she was trying to rebuild her life in a healthier way. That was all anyone could really ask. As I write this, in the spring of 2029, the situation has fully resolved. Patricia made her fourth payment last month, with one more to go. The criminal case is long closed, with Patricia having completed her probation successfully. The civil suit is nearly concluded, with just one final payment remaining. The Pine Ridge HOA has been operating without incident for years, and my property remains blissfully free of any association entanglements. I expanded my chicken operation from 3 birds to a dozen, and I sell eggs at the local farmers market. Herbert the goat passed away last winter at the respectable age of 11, and I buried him under the big pine tree where he used to like to nap. Ranger is still going strong, though he moves slower these days and prefers sleeping on the porch to chasing deer. My software business continues to thrive, and I've gotten more involved in local land rights advocacy, helping other rural property owners understand their rights and protect themselves from HOA overreach. Sarah and I give occasional seminars at the county library about property law and homeowner rights, which are always surprisingly well attended. The experience changed me in ways I'm still discovering. I am more vigilant about protecting my rights, more willing to stand up to authority when it oversteps its bounds, and more appreciative of the freedoms I have. I am also more forgiving, having seen how someone like Patricia could spiral from well-meaning community leader to convicted criminal, and how she could start the long climb back to being a decent person. My 12 acres remain my sanctuary, my escape from the noise and demands of the world. Every morning, I wake up to the sound of my chickens greeting the dawn, and every evening, I watch the sunset over the mountains from my front porch. This land is mine, bought and paid for, protected by law, and defended in court. Patricia Thornton tried to take it from me while I was snowed in and helpless, thinking she could exploit a procedural loophole in my isolation to annex my property before I could fight back. She thought wrong. My attorney had the filing voided by noon that very first day, and the battle that followed ended with justice served, lessons learned, and my property rights firmly protected. That is the story of how I fought an HOA and won, how I protected my land and my freedom, and how I learned that standing up for what is right, even when it is difficult and expensive, is always worth it in the end. My 12 acres in Montana are more than just property to me now. They represent something fundamental about American freedom, the right to own land, to use it as you see fit within the bounds of law, and to be left alone to live your life without busybodies and petty tyrants trying to impose their will on you. Patricia Thornton forgot that lesson, and it cost her dearly. But in losing everything, she also gained an opportunity to start over, to rebuild her life on a foundation of respect for others rather than control over them. I hope she succeeds, and I believe she will. As for me, I am exactly where I want to be, doing exactly what I want to do, on land that is indisputably and legally mine. The HOA tried annexing my acreage while I was snowed in, but my attorney had the filing voided by noon, and that made all the difference. The legal battle is over. Justice was served. Life goes on. And my 12 acres of Montana wilderness remain free from HOA control, now and forever, protected by law and defended by someone who understood that property rights matter, that procedural rules exist for good reasons, and that you cannot just steal someone's land because you do not like how they store their firewood. That is my story, and I am sticking to it.